Good evening, everyone. I think we're going to start. There are a few people coming in, and if you'll just excuse them as they make their way. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to those at home watching the live streaming event. It's wonderful to know that we are broadcasting around the country. Thank you to Exclusive Books, Hyde Park, for hosting us, and to the Pan Macmillan team. I'm not going to take up too much of your time because I'm hoping for a very robust, exciting discussion. But this morning we held a workshop at the office, and one of the opening quotes that was used resonated so much ahead of this evening. And it was Thomas Sankara who said, "We must dare to invent the future. Our future in South Africa is uncertain and concerning. Once again, we're faced with the perennial South African precipice, but this time the cliff feels higher, the seas wilder and more treacherous. Most South Africans would like to put their heads down, work hard, pay their taxes, educate their children, and live a tranquil middle-class existence. But remaining an armchair critic and expecting things to get better, though, is no longer possible. And for Songezo, for one, is standing up and calling for action. An on-the-ground effort, a movement, if you will, and a manifesto that is a clarion call to all South Africans, but particularly the professionals and middle class who tend to sometimes remain silent. I'm not going to delve into detail, but this book is about renewal, a reset, a reimagining, and most importantly, about building a better future for our children. Songezo is a man who succeeded at many things in life. He seamlessly straddled the world of respected commentator, business day editor, professional within the corporate space at ABSA, in addition to sitting on the boards of the Centre for Development and Enterprise and the Open Society Foundation of South Africa. And more recently, Songezo is the chairman of the recently launched Rivonia Circle, which I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone in this audience about, but make your way to the website, sign up and volunteer. This is Songezo's second book, and we're thrilled to publish it after the 2014 success of Raising the Bar. In conversation with Songezo tonight is Bongani Bingwa. Bongani knows how to ask the difficult and provocative questions, given his extensive career in broadcasting, journalism, and the range of people he has interviewed for his shows on 702 and Carte Blanche. Bongani, we look forward to a lively and thought-provoking discussion. And I did ask him a bit earlier, what is it about the Eastern Cape crew, especially those born in the Transkei? They're real rabble-rousers. So over to you. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much to everyone who's here. Thank you to Songezo for inviting me and the Pan Macmillan team for allowing me to facilitate this session. Isn't it great to be out? Yeah, isn't it great to be out and to see everyone? Gosh, this is what, dare I say, an unexpected read in many respects. I tweeted a little earlier on that as the professional class, as the middle class, we have cushioned ourselves from the realities of governance failures in South Africa. We have private education, we have private security, private healthcare, and now I believe even private fire engines. Right? But obviously, really the point of this book, I imagine, is for you that warning that we better wake up from our slumber, from our complacency before it's too late. And I want to start from the sense of despair that you say prompted you to write this book, right? You talked about raw emotion, that our future was looking increasingly bleak. Do you still feel that sense of despair having written it?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Bongani, and good evening to everybody. And thank you very much for attending today. Yes, Bongani, I do, because writing the book is not in and of itself the solution. There's a lot of work to be done in the years ahead. I still feel that sense of despair because many things continue to go wrong in our country. I think the most obvious are the millions and millions of people that can't even find work, and the millions who are in their 20s and 30s and they've never had the opportunity to work. those people can't advance their dignity. They can't advance their lives. They cannot live the full rights and opportunities of citizenship. So notwithstanding the fact that there is a minority of South Africans who are able to cushion themselves from the troubles that we see, we must despair at the fact that there are so many people who are just looking for hope and can't find it.
Was there a particular moment where you felt something happened, an event perhaps, where you thought, so far and no further?
There have been many moments, Bongani, not one singular moment. There have been many moments. For me, this has been a journey of many, many years. I think I began to get a sense that something was going wrong in South Africa around 2004, 2005, that long ago. Because what we'd heard in the years leading up to that, from 1994 to 2004, was a period of state building, was a period of growth in opportunities. The economy was growing, the unemployment remained high, but it was reducing. When you're talking unemployment of 35, 36% now, at some point in 2006, 2007, it was at 21%, still high, but it was reducing, right? But then things changed. We began to see the troubles in the governing party, in the African National Congress, the growth in corruption, the growth in a sense of impunity, actually, in the beginning of the destruction of the state and agencies of the state. Now, let me talk about why that's particularly important. Institutions are the mechanisms with which you get things done in a democracy on behalf of the people. When you destroy them, you're destroying the ability to create a better life for people. And therefore, these outcomes like unemployment and lack of service delivery and so on are the logical outcome of institutional destruction over the years. And that's when I started to despair.
And I imagine when the institutions start to fail, there's that vacuum that's created. You talk in the book about a sense of distraction. And we will all say that, for example, the working class, the poor, these unemployed that you refer to, in many instances are rising up, are making their voices heard. And one of the distractions you point out to is the increasing xenophobic sentiment. If you think about something like Operation Dudula, right? It's led by a youngster at least relative to you and me, right? Led by a youngster who, has a triple-story house in Pimville, has a fleet of luxury vehicles, a Maserati. No one quite can explain who he is, where he has come from, his sudden wealth. And you say that kind of thing is a distraction. How is it a symptom of that distraction?
So, Bongani, I think the first point I want to make is South Africa's poor have been carrying this democracy on their backs for the longest time, because they are the people who protest to try and extract accountability. We call it service delivery protests, when people try and extract some accountability from those we elect. The difference between those people and the people who are able to check out of the system is that we start procuring private services. You're mentioning fire engines, and it's private security. It is private estates, large estates that have got office parks in them and that sort of thing. So I see those as ways in which people are checking out, not only out of South African life, but out of democratic participation. Now, why do I say this is a distraction? It's a distraction not because I'm being dismissive of the concerns about crime, about a broken immigration system, and so on. It's a distraction because the work that we have to do is so vast. We can chase away every person who's not South African. If we still have institutions that don't work, we have corrupt politicians, we've got corrupt business people, and so on, the same outcomes will happen. So we need to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time by fixing many things at once. And that effort is not just the outcome of projects. It's a concerted effort by plugged-in citizens, because democracy is a system of self-government. There is no checking out.
Is there a greater example? Because even if we talk about the high levels of unemployment, we cannot ignore, as you point out in the book, even the education system that produces people who are not fit for purpose in terms of what this economy demands. People who are not only unemployed, but who are actually unemployable. Even if you could create all the jobs and get that growth, you don't necessarily have the skills. Talk to me about the tragedy of wasted human capital.
So Bongani, let me start here in answering this question. So the fundamental proposition I make in the book is that we have to reimagine the country completely. We cannot solve some of its problems or its deepest problems by picking them one by one. Let me make an example. I draw a picture of what properly functioning communities need to be like. So you mentioned the education system. If you live in an unsafe environment, you use unsafe transport, you don't have sporting facilities, you don't have arts and cultural facilities, your health facilities are not good, your education outcomes are going to suffer because the environment in which you are situated is unhelpful. Add to that the fact that a lot of parents don't even have an opportunity to be parents because they have to wake up at 4:30 so that they can get to an office in Sandton or somewhere in the Cape Town CBD at 7 o'clock and then only be back home after this hour that we are sitting here. So they don't get to be members of a community. They don't get to be members of a family, understand what's going on with their children and so on, and support them even with their education. And therefore, when we talk about just the education, for instance, or just the economy, it doesn't give a full accounting of what we need to fix. And therefore, what I'm saying is that we need to re-examine the entire South African formula of how we understand progress, of how we understand freedom. Because if we can't link the material benefits of a dignified life to freedom, then we are going to fail and have all of these outcomes in terms of education, in terms of crime, in terms of maths and literacy and so on.
Let's talk to some degree to the room now. There are many who would be here in attendance today whose backgrounds perhaps are very familiar in terms of what you've just described now. The parents who leave at the crack of dawn, who only come back after dusk, but who have made it nonetheless. And there's a lot of paying back, if you will, the so-called black taxes, right? People who've finally made it into the middle class, who are only beginning to pick up the pieces of previous generations. Aren't you being a bit unfair on the professional class?
No, I mean, I'm not blaming the professional class for the lack of outcomes. What I'm asking us to do as South Africans, especially those South Africans who've had the benefit of education, we have to reimagine the country and reshape it in our worldview and reshape it in a way that produces the outcomes that were promised in 1994. That's what we have to do. That work is not just showing up at the ballot box and voting for somebody and walking away and then living your normal life. Unfortunately, democracy, as I've realized, and I use the term we when I write in the book, because my awakening about what needs to be done and how bad things were has taken time. So that we are able to look after our families and our extended families, including paying the black tax that you're talking about, is not enough, because there are people who are not even able to pay that black tax. In any country, it's not possible to have prosperity for yourself or for a few people and sustain the stability of that system when the majority of people are not able to benefit from that same system. So we need to have a sense of justice out of this democracy, whether it is economic justice, it is social justice, environmental justice, and so on. So the challenge, Bongani, specifically is we must be bold. This is what happens to professionals. I must spell it out. This is what happens. People become scared to speak because they're going to be targeted at their places of work, right? That's anti-democratic, because what happens is that people do not play the full role of citizenship that they need to play. Unfortunately, this is not going to change. So we must do something called ukufostela, which is notwithstanding the threats and the intimidation and the fear that you are going to have to endure, we have to do this so that we can build a better country.
Let me ask you the indelicate question then,
Yes.
which would be, a critic might say, in fact, somebody may have suggested already, that you might be wagging your finger, right?
Yes.
A moral finger perched on your high horse when your livelihood is not at stake. I mean, that fear of recrimination is very real for many people in the professional class. And we have too many examples of people who've suffered the consequences of standing up. And we'll maybe talk about some of those.
Yes.
But ultimately, I mean, it's almost as if one could read you and say, aren't you gaslighting the very people from whom the corrupt steal, without whom there'd be nothing to steal?
No, I'm not gaslighting, Bongani, because unfortunately, these are the same people that phone you and complain, right? This is us. Okay. So I'm not gaslighting. We all know what's wrong. The lamentations we hear is that we should have better leaders. All I'm saying is that the good leaders phone your show. There is a lack of belief that we have the capability, we have it within ourselves to change and reshape the country in the way that it needs to be. That self-belief is important because without it, Bongani, we're going to be polite to one another. And we've been polite to one another since 2009. And look where we are today with 45% unemployment.
Let's talk about the options that are available, and we'll move on to the call that you're making. I was particularly intrigued by your five symptoms of political decay. Perhaps the first four are common cause, but I would have preferred, or would have liked, for you to spend a little bit of time on the last one, stating the case for why you think even the mainstream opposition parties are found wanting and inadequate.
Yes, let's talk about that, Bongani. So one of the failures of the post-1994 period has been democratization, the deepening of democratic participation. We don't have a culture of democratic participation. So people say, oh, politics is irritating. And I can understand why, by the way. So I don't blame people for saying that. Politicians are corrupt. They're in it for themselves, because we've come to believe that the only way to participate in politics is to join a political party. And the political parties we have a system, an internal system, each one of them, by the way, that does not believe in open democratic accountability itself. So when people are elected to parliament, eventually, because we voted for the party, who are they accountable to, Bongani? They're accountable to the party and not to us. So for 5 years, apart from those few weeks when there's an election campaign, for 5 years, citizens are shut out of the political system, because if you don't belong to a branch, then you're out of the system. The right thing to do in a young democracy such as ours is to build a culture of democratic participation, whether you are in a political party or not. Now, this is a national responsibility that every political party that is in parliament should pursue, and they don't. They obsess about the number of members and the number of branches they have. And parties are a club, essentially. So that is the first thing. The second thing, they have come to believe that no new solutions are possible. I'll give you an example, Bongani. One of the most pressing issues that all South Africans across all income groups will tell you is cost of living. You tell me, you host a current affairs show, which political party in the last year or 2 years or 3 years has spoken about cost of living as a major issue? Cost of living gives you a window into a whole range of other issues. It is not just housing, it is transport, it is all the extra services that people have to pay for because the state is failing and so on, right? Political parties are there to get a vote and then walk away. What I'm saying in the book is that a different politics must be possible. It is not going to fall from the sky. We must create it. We must start new conversations, different conversations in different spaces outside of the party political branches to talk about the things that matter to ordinary South Africans in a language that people can relate to.
The sins of incumbency are obvious in terms of what the ANC's failures are, and you go into some detail about a number of them. But the point about emphasizing or underscoring what the opposition is also failing is beyond just a failure of imagination, surely. It's beyond just a lack of ideas. It's the fact that if you're going to say the professional class needs to respond in a different way to what we are seeing unfold, then all of those faults have to be a lot clearer, should they not?
The faults of
the opposition.
Okay, I hope the building is not crashing.
Yeah.
So the faults of the opposition, what do you mean they're going to have to be clear?
What I'm saying is the sins of incumbency as far as the ANC are clear enough.
Yes.
But I would have liked you to go into some more detail around what the opposition is not failing to provide as an alternative.
Right.
So that the conversation then about a new imagining, a new way of thinking around these ideas becomes that much clearer.
So there are two reasons for that, Bongani, why I don't spend a lot of time analyzing the opposition parties. The first is that we had an election last year. Millions of South Africans decided they don't want those opposition parties either. There are very few things I can tell ordinary people about what's wrong with the DA and the EFF and the UDM and so on that they don't already know. So that is the first thing. The second thing is I had to make a decision in the writing about how much time I spend on the problems and how much time I spend on the solutions. I have opted to spend that energy and space on how we can reimagine South Africa completely. And I'm sure we'll go through it. There are lots of other things that I propose in the book. But the opposition parties suffer from the same existential problem as the ANC. There is a decision to be made, Bongani, by every political formation about whether they're going to insist on their ideological dogmatic position as the anchor, and that we must drag the millions of South Africans to that position. That's what the DA is trying to do. That's what Ivan Jim tried to do with that Workers' Party of his, and it didn't work. We know how that's going for the Democratic Alliance. The EFF faces the same existential crisis, by the way. The ANC's ideology, unfortunately, has become corruption. But the point I'm making, Bongani, in this instance is a new alternative has to understand where the South African moral and ethical center is and produce a political proposition that resonates with South Africans' idea of justice.
I asked that question because, I mean, as I said to you this morning on the radio, you don't have to be a Davy Scholz to know that from the ANC's commanding heights of 70%, right, 2024 is likely to not go too well for them. But as you point out in the book, even coalition arrangements are not going to be the panacea for our pain that so many people imagine they could be. We've already seen how messy they can get in local government.
Yes, in fact, I mean, there are two things. I might sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. We're entering an era where coalitions are going to be par for the course. So in 2024, a coalition is more likely than not. The only thing we don't know is the composition of that coalition and what that coalition will stand for, if anything other than raw power, for power's sake. The lesson we learn from the metros is that the trade-offs often have to do with the portfolios and the positions themselves, rather than a set of priorities, principles, and solutions that are going to solve the problems of the residents in that city. It's about power. It's about ego. Imagine what will happen in 2024 when that happens in the union buildings. There will be no country left. So that's the first point. The second point is the existential question for the rest of us is whether the biggest vote is going to be the vote that says we are handing the country over to these guys to divvy it up amongst themselves while we check out of the system. Or we're going to make a conscious choice to have a voice, and that voice is principled. It's premised on clear principles, on values, on priorities, and solutions that are going to respond to the problems of the South African people. That's one of the propositions I make in the book, Bongani, because that moment is real. It is going to happen. There is no escaping it. We are going to deal with coalitions, potentially chaotic, potentially corrupt, potentially will collapse the country faster than the ANC is doing it now.
How worried should we be about the collapse, the implosion of the ANC? Thabo Mbeki tells us the country will not survive very well with the ANC collapsing.
If there is a vacuum, it will not be good. But there does not need to be a vacuum, Bongani. That's my point. There does not need to be a vacuum, and the vacuum is created by so many of us deciding not to participate in multiple ways, including voting. Right? That's the first instance. I think in every country's existence, there comes a time when it is necessary to decide how the end will come, if an end will come. I would rather we have the sort of outcome, even if it's unfavorable. Millions more of us know that we fought for the right outcome in 2024, rather than saying, we knew this is what they were going to do. They corrupt, they don't care about us. Look at us now. That's not an option.
So with the paucity of options that we've just discussed, what does stepping into the arena mean?
So there are different ways, Bongani, by the way, and I'll start with the small things. So I'm a parent, and I believe many people here are parents. So South Africa is littered with democratic participation options or opportunities all over. And if we're honest with ourselves, I wonder how many of us attend those parent meetings at school, right, where decisions get taken, and then later on we find that a really bad decision was taken by the 12 parents that bothered to show up, right? Now, there is a saying that in order to be trusted with big things, we gotta show that we can be trusted with the small things. And when I talk about democratic participation, I am really intentional about it, because I know we all want to talk about the politics and so on at a national level. It's really important that at every level where democratic participation is necessary, that we participate. We learn to work with others. We learn to negotiate. We learn to compromise, to find common solutions to common problems. It's really important. I can't emphasize this enough. So part of the work that my colleagues and I are doing at Rivonia Circle, apart from listening to South Africans, it's also trying to work and understand how people in different communities are participating in democratic processes, and seeing whether we cannot empower those groups and those individuals to participate more effectively in democratic processes in their local environment, because that's important. So that is the first step. Without that, Bongani, change at a national level is going to be very difficult. As politicians, I saw my friend Makashule Ghana is sitting over there. He always says, in politics, everything is local. And it is. So that is the first thing. The second thing, Bongani, is that I believe the most important thing we've got to get over is the mental block, the fear of exploring an alternative. Do I know what the right alternative is? No. I don't have the perfect alternative as I'm sitting here. But I can also tell you, since I started doing this work that I'm doing, I've met more South Africans than I have in the last couple of years who are also exploring alternatives. Sometimes you just need to start walking the journey.
How do we avoid this conversation from being elitist in a sense? In other words, we sit here in this bookstore in Hyde Park. thrashing these ideas out without an awareness that whatever decisions we make, whatever involvement we choose, it is going to need all South Africans to participate. The reality that you're outlining is going to need to be attractive to more than just the professional class.
No, sure, Bongani. Don't make me recruit now, because I'm going to point people to our website. But Bongani, look, the thing we are really about in the work that I'm doing now is asking people to volunteer their time, to volunteer their skills, to volunteer their experience, to volunteer their expertise, in order that we may have these conversations and solutions in a lot more communities, unfortunately. Bongani,
where? How?
What do you mean where?
Where? How? Where do they volunteer their skills, their time, doing what? Where do they start? Okay, so Bongani, I am now going to do the recruitment pitch. I'm going to do the recruitment pitch I keep avoiding in this conversation. So we have, I'm part of the Rivonia Circle. I'm one of the co-founders. We have a website, www.rivoniacircle.org. When you get there, there is a tab that says Get Involved. And if you click on that tab, you've got an opportunity to become an associate, you can become a contributor. Those opportunities take you to other South Africans outside of these spaces, where we can begin to find the real solutions to real political problems that people are feeling on the ground, right? That's what I'm doing. But I will also tell you that we're not the only ones who are doing so. There are many organizations. You interview those people on your show all the time, Bongani. This belief that there are no options for people is not true. We choose to not pay attention. You've interviewed Mark Haywood. You've interviewed people from all sorts of organizations. Do we ever say, how can I help with that initiative that people are doing? That's my point. And to be clear, you yourself aren't launching a political movement. No, the Rivonia Circle is not a political movement, no. What we are keen on, Bongani, by the way, to be clear on this, what we are keen on is this book is about political, economic, and social alternatives. And political alternatives don't just end with the political reforms I propose in the book. I think it is possible for South Africans to fashion three things. The first, we have an understanding of what this South African Constitution enjoins us to do. My proposition in the book is that our Constitution is social democratic in outlook. That's the kind of society that we have to create in South Africa. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have to decide what our idea of justice in a democracy is. And I talk about the kind of entitlements that people need to have in order for that to happen. So that is the second thing. The third thing is that each of us, we can walk out of here and commit to finding an organization that does one thing that we feel very strongly about. Just one thing, one thing. If it's education, if it's food security or whatever the case, just one thing, and I'm gonna make it a regular thing, right? The opportunity we have is the opportunity of conversation. And this book is that conversation about what should inform the South African political center in future, and what political and other outcomes can we drive out of that shared belief. Is it a lack of belief when one considers that a number of the proposals you make, even around political reform, ultimately require the political parties who are going to be the ones to make those reforms in terms of legislation to do so, when in fact, even the very basics they are trying to skirt around, even if we think of what 2024 might be about and what the Constitutional Court has said in terms of electoral reform. In other words, a lot of the people in power, whether in government or in opposition, the party bosses really do like their offices. They do, but I'll tell you something about the numbers, the electoral numbers that we have. There's plenty of room for new political options. There is. So
what do we have? We have about 12 million South Africans who are eligible to vote who have not voted. So that is the first thing. So we know that there is a market out there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we also know that the reason people are not voting is not because they were busy or they forgot, it's because they're disgruntled. They want change. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that we have an otherwise vibrant political environment with civil society, with political parties, and so on, that engage in conversation all the time. The ground is fertile, Bongani, for new political alternatives. You merely have to look at what the former mayor of Johannesburg has been able to do. Got 6% while only contesting in the metros only. After only a few months. I'm not parting his party, I'm saying the opportunity is available. This belief that we have a behemoth called the ANC that cannot be defeated is something we need to get over, and get over it very quickly, because as with anything, people have already switched out of it. What we know though is that they've consciously chosen not to vote for DA or the EFF either. Now, if we look around here, we look around the country, we look around Gauteng, KZN, and so on, Bongani, South Africa is not short of talent and intellectual capital. People who can fashion new political alternatives for the millions of people who are feeling disaffected. The failure is a failure of organizing and producing the ideas and the values and the principles that are going to inform what alternatives we have. So the fact that I don't have a perfect alternative here today does not mean that in a year's time there won't be. But we have to start the conversation.
Well, certainly this room is not short of intellectual capital, and I don't want to hog the conversation. I do believe we have a roving mic, and if people want to direct questions specifically to Songezo, this would be your opportunity. And perhaps through a show of hand, if you want to raise a hand. There is a question over there. Let's start right at the back.
Thank you so much, Songezo, for the book that you've written. I think it's a very timely book, and I'm hoping that it will have a timeless impact on the trajectory of this country. My name is Zukiso Mkolomba. My question to you in regards to the ANC in particular, the ANC speaks of organizational renewal. Have you given up all hope that the ANC has the innate ability to transform itself and to change? I was saying that the ANC is no longer the party for the future, and that it lacks the capabilities or even the political will to change itself from the destructive path that's currently undertaken.
Thank you. The answer I will give is this. The only thing that has not been done as far as the ANC is concerned is for somebody to administer the final rights and lay it to rest. Let me explain why. So I think we have to understand something about organizational decay in general. The process the ANC is going through is no different to what happens sometimes in companies and happens in other organizations. In particular, when you fall into complacency due to lack of competition. When you fall into complacency due to lack of competition, and you develop a sense of entitlement, you lose the muscle to try hard and excel. You lose that muscle. If Usain Bolt had to compete against people like me all the time, he would start training less because he doesn't need to. But he still would not get an Olympic record because he's, right? You understand? So the competition is good. The ANC is a victim of of its own doing, first of all, but also of South Africa's poor democratization over the last 27 years. Because the best thing the ANC could have is a very strong opposition. Because it would make it run faster, harder, all the time. It has absolutely no motivation. ANC members, and leaders are not people that exist over there. They're in our families. They are family members. Sometimes even when they try to do the right thing, they do it wrong. Because there will be no consequence. And this is why where the ANC has lost an election, it's gone. The Western Cape, the ANC once had the province and the city. It will not get them back. Not under the current circumstances where the organizational decay is so visible every day, with people taking their pants off and throwing things at one another. That's no way to advertise your suitability to run a country such as ours. So unfortunately, that's my belief. We need to internalize the end of the ANC. We need to internalize it and not be afraid of that moment and focus our efforts on alternatives. Because if we don't, the demise of the ANC, which is internally driven, will leave a vacuum that takes us down with it. That's what will happen. And the choice for many of us between party and the country, you've got to decide what you're loyal to. Is it the country or is it the party? If you're loyal to the party, then you can go down with it. But that's the choice.
Okay. We've got a...
If I may, the name is Simon White. Just to add to my sister, unfortunately, the ANC is beyond redemption. That's just the fact. Number one, the ANC have betrayed this country. They betrayed the youth of this country. And many youth, you mentioned, many of the youth would be unemployable. Someone mentioned 2 days ago, the youth of today are a cursed generation. And those are very painful words. And those are the deeds of the ANC. And it's in the olden days, in the days of the struggle and everything else, we used to talk of people that betray the struggle. And the ANC is exactly what they've done. Right? That's the one part. So I firmly believe that the ANC is beyond redemption. If you look at conscious leadership, and you just refer to the Oxford Dictionary or the Collins Dictionary, they meet none of that criteria. So I think we should get about the ANC if you are concerned about this country's future. The one thing I'd like to ask and raise is the following. In the past, there were about 15 years ago, there was much talk about the patriotic bourgeoisie, right? And a lot of reference was made about the black elite playing a very important, constructive change agent role in the economy and the need to support them. Now, if you look at what has happened over the many years, many black business organizations, and I won't mention names, from BMF, from BMF, Sanko, and quite a few others. We can name the top black industry organizations in South Africa in terms of what they stand for or what they purported to stand for. Many of them have been praise singers to the current government. Many of them got deals from government, and many of the constitutions and the shareholders agreements, right, reflect transformation and building this country, right? And at this point in time, they have very little to show for what they've done or what they've achieved over the many years, right? And many of them, the leadership in particular, so-called leadership, have stolen a hell of a lot of money. I know of two organizations, for instance, which said they will give bursaries to the youth, and they've never given one purple dime, right? So, and I think as part of this whole exercise, we need to reflect and introspect into many of those organizations that have made commitments, public commitments in the shareholders agreements and in the constitutions, and have done little, right? So essentially, they have betrayed the struggle, they betrayed what we stand for, and they've betrayed the hope and the desire for a better future. And this is not ANC slogan, by the way, but we deserve better. Thank you.
Co-opted and bought?
Look, I mean, I'm not going to make specific comments on specific organization. The general comment I'll make is this: is that over the last 27 years, we have had the building of an ecosystem that has got three component parts. The first is what I'll call white capital. The second is the African National Congress's ecosystem as the party that is in power. And the third is an emerging Black professional and middle class and the business class, effectively. The emerging professional and business class needs the approval of the other two, who are, for the longest time, have been in a symbiotic relationship between the two of them. That symbiotic relationship clearly does not work in terms of the outcomes, and I'll explain why. I'll give one or two examples. It became known over the years, a common thing for chief executives of large companies to beat a path to Luthuli House in order to ask for one or other thing or to pay their tributes to the party. That created a parallel system where the party itself was an animal to be feared and to be respected by capital, right? But it also opened an opportunity, because if you do a little something for people in that ecosystem, the party looks away, right? And people complain, the BMFs and all of these guys complain about transformation and so on. These same people from that ecosystem get appointed as chairs of companies specifically to do nothing about this transformation that is talking about, because they can't even read the balance sheet properly. It's true, we know it, it's true, we know it. And so one of the reasons I propose a fundamental shift in how we understand this ecosystem is because that ecosystem is unreformable. It's like the ANC itself, it's unreformable. Second example I'm going to give you, we've recently had large companies in the Northwest and also in Mpumalanga taking the government to court because municipalities have collapsed. Now, I've served on national business associations. Local government never comes up because the focus is on talking to Minister X and Minister Y. But companies and their employees and ordinary people live in localities. It doesn't matter because they are concerned with that ecosystem in which they live. We need to pop that bubble. And that bubble is not going to pop itself, which is the point at which I keep saying, if people from outside of that ecosystem who phone your show do not stand up and say we need to create a new and differently composed ecosystem, it's not going to happen.
Do we have the time? I think one of the questions that we must ask is, whilst we figure out these new ideas and these new approaches, the people who are at the receiving end, who suffer because of the failures we are talking about, how concerned are you about unrest and the rise in people taking things into their own hands?
I've been worried about that since before the July riots, because actually South Africans are very peaceful, by the way. I don't know of a country in which so many people have so little, where we don't get July 2021 every month. Honest, South Africans are very restrained, they're very peaceful. And that is the other agency, unfortunately, and that is, we don't have the luxury of time, both in terms of the electoral cycle in South Africa, 24, 26, 29, right? That, and secondly, we don't have time in terms of whether we are able to start giving more South Africans hope now, so that they've got something to hold on to. Now, in this book are very practical solutions about the things we need to change in our politics, how we need to approach our economy, how we need to understand differently how society as a whole should function. Because if you take something like Operation Tutula, Bongani, moralizing the problem does not help. Why? Because there are certain things we know. We have a broken immigration system. It's broken. It's got to be fixed. Unfortunately, that requires technical and other solutions. It's got to be done. So that I used to work for a bank, and one of the MDs in the countries needed to apply for a visa each time they come here, even though they come here 5-6 times a year, as an example. So that system is broken. Right? At the same time, we have a country that does not know who's here at any given point in time, who's an asylum seeker, who's not. And guys, let's not moralize. That kind of thing is not okay. It's not saying people must leave. It's saying, can we run our country properly and know what we're doing, right? The people who are not South African citizens have not created that problem. We have, through our neglect, through our corruption. So that is the first thing. The second thing is we have destroyed this economy. We have destroyed this economy. The reason so many people are unemployed is fundamentally because we have destroyed the economy, we've destroyed political institutions, we have destroyed the very social fabric of South Africa. So my criticism is this, that if we think that we are going to solve all of these things by chasing away people who are not South African citizens, we're kidding ourselves, because we are not pointing a finger at ourselves to solve the problems that we've created.
Okay. We've got a question over there.
Hey, Songezo. Look, I feel dumb for asking this question because you just said the answers in the book. The question really is, what do you mean practically by a political alternative? Because I'm trying to imagine it and nothing comes to mind that hasn't already been done. I asked this because there are over 620 registered political parties in South Africa. We're not short of options. 48 of them participated in the national government election. Yet 90% of the voter share went to the three biggest political parties. The others just shared the 10% amongst them. That means that there's no appetite for an alternative. Yeah, sure, we can speak about the 11 million people who did not rock up to vote, but amongst the 14 million who did vote, they overwhelmingly said, we want the establishment, we want the big three. So what does it look like when you say an alternative to the status quo? Because to me, it's like there's many alternatives. There's a party running a food kitchen somewhere, a community garden somewhere. They're not getting the votes, but they're active in the communities. They're speaking to people on the ground. It's exactly what you're asking us to do. Rock up at the parents' evening, speak to the ward councillor. But that doesn't seem to be working if that's what you mean by the alternative.
No, that's not what I mean by the alternative. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to buy the book, because I do set out a couple of things. So what's been missing is a different idea. That's what's been missing. It's a different idea. So I've been trying to avoid taking pot shots at the political parties. Let me take a shot at someone other than the ANC or the DA and use the economic freedom fighters. So I come from a village, and I can see a few Eastern Capers here. And you see a message that says in my area that we going to nationalize land from white people is a niche message, because in some instances it makes sense, but where I live, there are no white people, but people want land. People want land, right? If you come from the Eastern Cape, you know that if you are along the major arteries, the competition for land to settle is brutal. Is there a solution for those people too? Because their needs matter. No, there isn't, because South African political parties engage in politics of gimmickry. They engage in politics of gimmickry. That's the problem. However, because I want you to buy the book, it's here. You can start with the final chapter, which is called Manifesto itself, because what I do is I draw an architecture. I start at centering the Constitution and what I believe it asks us to do. I then interpret that ideologically and say, this Constitution is social democratic. I then explain what values accrue in terms of social democracy and what kind of social entitlements we need to have and what kind of ideas we need to pursue. That's what I do in the book. So please buy it and let's engage in the conversation, because the South African political parties are about old ideas. They are. The ANC is about power and the others are about ideological dogmas that they don't want to let go of. instead of challenging themselves to imagine a different future and different solutions.
All right, go ahead.
Right. Yes, thank you, Songezo Mhlanganisi. Quick one, and I'm curious about the distinction between priorities and ideology and moving away from dogma. And you take us back to social democracy, and that in itself speaks to some form of ideology. So, but I'd like to get your view on then how you see that distinction working when you go back to the same bucket in terms of ideologically placing it somewhere.
Thank you for that question, Mhlanganisi. So what I have done, let me explain my thinking. What I have done is I've asked myself, what do I think South Africans' moral political sense is? What do they want, right? I believe South Africans love their freedom. I also believe South Africans don't want to leave other South Africans behind. I also believe that the majority of South Africans understand our history and the role that the state should play in making sure that we can have an equitable environment in our society and so on. So you can have this conversation with South Africans without even having to open a smart book somewhere. I have then asked myself, in terms of your classical definitions of ideology, what would you call this? And I have found it to be congruent with social democratic values. That's how I arrive at that. So I have tried to locate that idea in terms of what I believe the South African political moral sense is. That's all.
We'll take perhaps two more and then we'll move towards a closing.
My name is Zakonate. Songezo, you talk about old political parties with old ideas. You seem to be beating about the bush. Is Manifesto your way of launching a political career? We do know these old political parties run while they are not running, people running for the office. Are you or are you not launching a political party? And if you are, how different will it be from the 620 parties?
Zikonati, I thought you were no longer a journalist. But since you ask, one of the things I was very clear on with this book and the work that I'm doing is that it's work that is political in nature, first of all. So in terms of whether it is a foray into politics, it is, because we talk about political alternatives every day all over the country with various people. So in that sense, it is a foray into politics. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the ideas I propagate here need political power to effect. We must accept the centrality of political power in order to change these things that we're talking about. If you're not in the union buildings, clearly nothing changes. So that is the second thing. The third thing, out of recognition of my own self-criticism and my criticism of others, Bongani keeps saying I criticize. It is that there is nothing in this book that I am not prepared to do myself. The reason I make that commitment is the following. For the last 27 years, we've had all sorts of wonderful ideas. For whom? For other people to do. That's why they never happen. It's for other people to do. So this book is an opportunity for a conversation with South Africans. We're on multiple platforms so that we can talk about what the best alternatives forward are. Right now, this is not a political party. And I need to clarify something in respect of the Rivonia Circle. The Rivonia Circle will always be a non-profit company because political parties do not concern themselves with producing good ideas, especially not for the long term. They concern themselves with winning votes for the short term and engage in gimmicks. The Rivonia Circle, we have committed that it is going to be around for 100 years or more, producing forward-looking ideas, not just talking about tomorrow, but talking about the next 20 to 30 years. Because that's what other countries do. We don't do those kind of things in South Africa. We must start doing them.
In 2006, I think it was, when Hillary Clinton released that first video, did she not say, let's start a conversation?
Bongani. Mark, shut up.
Hi, evening, everyone. My name is Songe. First, just to say congratulations, Songs, again. Really great work that you're doing. So, my question is, as someone who's left the private sector and joined the public sector, not too long ago, I'm still in shock. But it's been 3 years, so I'm surviving. So I haven't read the book, but obviously the centrality, part of what central I'm picking up is obviously the role of the professional class and obviously developing a capable state. So I mean, without having read the book, perhaps the answer is in the book, but what's your call to the professional class with regards to the role they can play in professionalizing the state and doing something as bold as I did? Accidentally, I might. But I'm there now and I see lots of opportunity and possibilities and a lot that can be fixed quite easily, actually, by joining the public service. And I think if you could just respond to that, leaving the political element of it, but just people with skills coming into the public sector to make a difference. What's the role there?
Thank you. Thank you, Songs. And Songs is a friend of many years standing, and he does work in the public sector. So, Songs, I write about this and I make some examples. So, I had opportunity a few times to go to Parliament, and one of the questions we were asked by one of the MPs was why our company came up with this BBBEE. That was from an MP, triple BEE. Why did your company come up with this triple BEE? And so we're to explain that it's legislation actually by the Department of Trade and Industry. Now, I guess one could laugh, but it's actually painful, right? Because it's something that shouldn't happen. So there's that one example. The other example is how we watched some of the ESCOM executives running rings around the MPs during the ESCOM inquiry. Because in all fairness, the stuff that they were dealing with was complicated commercial stuff that they couldn't deal with. Here's the thing about democracies. You need all the skills and experiences and life experiences that reflect that society in every arm of the state, including the legislature. Because MPs cannot hold the highly educated government officials and head of state-owned enterprises accountable if they don't have at least the same level of skill or something thereabouts, or education as they do. It's a simple fact. We don't want to talk about this because it sounds elitist, but I don't find it funny when MPs are being bamboozled by clever crooks. I don't find it funny. It shouldn't happen. A different version of it in another democracy was when Mark Zuckerberg and Jack and others came to the US Congress, and the people that are questioning them didn't even know what a Twitter like is. You get me? You need the diversity in parliament, diversity of skills. You need accountants, you need economists, you need engineers, you need all of these people in there along with the social workers and the nurses and the community workers and so on to reflect the diversity of South African life and what South Africa is. Because what will happen is that the one arm of the state is going to do whatever it likes and bamboozle the other. So it's not just about the public servants. So that's the one thing. The second thing, and I'm sorry, Bongani, it's a bit of a long answer because it's important. The second thing is, I often hear the question, but why doesn't the minister have advisors? The first thing is I have to know what kind of advice I need. I need to know who is a good advisor and who is not. Honestly. So you need a certain level of aptitude to work that out so that that person can advise you properly. So if you don't know what you don't know. So it's not just about the public service. I actually believe the public service has highly educated people. I know lots of public servants. They're highly educated, they're highly skilled. The political direction is poor. So we need to start a culture where it's possible for somebody who is 28 years old to become an MP for 5 years and still go on to a job. We gotta make that part of our culture. Or for 10 years and then go on to a job. It's important experience about our system of government, about legislation. You can go to a lot of places and you can start to deal with this culture of professional politicians who have no options, who would blend with the rest of the unemployed if they lost that job. So unfortunately, the public servants generally are highly educated people. The political management is bad. That's the problem. Where we need skilled people is in councils, it's in provincial legislatures, it's as MPs, so that the stock of ministers that rises from those ranks are the kind of people that can turn the country around. Otherwise, we fail.
Right, we'll take one more stab at letting everyone know what is in the book. I'm going to invite you to read perhaps a passage of your choosing as we close. And I believe this is, in fact, the actual call to action.
Thank you, Bongani. So bear with me, guys. It's about 15 pages, but I'll wrap it. Kidding. So this is chapter 10, and it's called Manifesto. And this is just the intro there too. It's not long. I think most South Africans view themselves as patriots, but the degree to which they show their commitment to patriotism through their regular actions varies from person to person. Most people's patriotism is a sentiment that only goes as far as expressing joy or disappointment when our national pride or sovereignty is undermined or threatened. I do not fault them for this. It is much the same in other countries. That said, countries are like ships at sea. Although there may be a crew and a captain that keeps it afloat, seaworthy and headed towards its correct destination, there are times when the ship is in so much trouble that everyone must step in and help in one way or another until the ship is in calmer waters or makes it back to port. During such times of crisis, many ordinary people step up and do extraordinary deeds to save themselves and their fellow passengers or crew on the ship. They are later called heroes and given medals, or have streets and entire towns named after them in recognition of their bravery. In almost all cases, there was very little about them before that event that suggested they were someone who would one day be fated as a hero. South Africa is a ship listing and tilting through stormy seas. So far, we have responded in 3 ways. The first is that we keep looking for and pointing fingers at who is to blame for its current condition, which continues to worsen. The second is that having done the above continuously, we are drifting further apart and getting attracted to sentiments and ideas that propose that throwing one or other section of the population overboard and leaving them to fend for themselves is the right one. Thirdly, we are waiting to be rescued by a new crew that will arrive by helicopter, seize the ship, clean it up, fix it, and sail it in the right direction so we can cheer them on when we get there. There is also no guarantee that we will not heckle them while they are busy trying to rescue the same ship. The problem with the above responses is that, like any ship, That level of distraction and apathy mean that it is almost certain that the ship will remain at sea and eventually sink. No one except those who manage to escape will be better off. Even those who manage to jump off will suffer lingering trauma at having to hear the cries and screams of those who remained aboard, unable to leave. For some of those who leave, they will land in hostile lands where many people object to their presence and may over time come to harm them in any event. In other words, there is also no dignity to exile from the responsibilities of patriotism. It is not helpful to believe in miracles either, to the extent that some on the ship may claim that they know ways in which the ship can be made to fly, clean itself while flying, and then find itself in the land of milk and honey. In desperate times, many will try or believe anything that looks like a way to create a better tomorrow. The real and consistent truth, however, is that no such miracles happen, no matter how many people hope and pray for them. Real people must sweat and bleed day in, day out to ensure the ship stays afloat and eventually makes it to shore. When it gets there, real people work hard to make sure it is repaired to a seaworthy condition so that it can sail successfully for many years to come. South Africa is not going to fix itself, and no one will miraculously appear from nowhere to make things better, no matter how much we hope for this. There will also be no miracle cures for our problems, regardless of the many peddlers of such miracle cures. As attractive and visceral as internal divisions and nationalist finger-pointing are, we will also not succeed at turning the country around if we remain divided or start violently attacking one another. We must remain united in authentic unity, which means we remain united without sugarcoating any of the problems we have, such as inequality and ongoing victimizations and oppressions of fellow South Africans. These are the things we need to do to get South Africa back into shape and steer it in the right direction. And then I make 9 proposals for the rest of that chapter. You will have to find out what they are.
Thank you, Songezo, and we'll obviously still have a couple of copies for sale and you'll be available to sign for a little while, but that brings us to the formal end of proceedings tonight. Thank you for everyone who has been here, for your attention, for your questions, and of course, buy the book. Thank you.
Just a quick thank you, Bongani. That was a fascinating discussion. Thank you for the audience who contributed. We can all go home dreaming of that land of milk and honey and the hard work that it entails. Songezo will be available to sign books, I think at the back there. Thank you to Exclusive Books, Hyde Park, and their wonderful staff who always put on a great show, and the team. So thank you.